Welcome to today's podcast. This is your Rubies of Grace host, Rose Inyama. Rubies of Grace podcast promote the principles of love, respect, mutual agreement, unity, integrity, and trust within our diverse relationships. With God's jewels beautifully crafted to radiate His image and light in this world. It's such a pleasure to be sharing this podcast on relationships matter with you. I do hope that you can come with me on this journey for us to better our relationships because relationships matter. Today we'll be dealing or exploring with our third relationship matter case study, and it's on infidelity and trust. In previous podcasts, we looked at a case study on loss of intimacy. We looked at a case study on communication breakdown. And today, the case study will be on infidelity and trust. As I said, we're using fictitious names. These are not real life examples, but can represent real life cases. And it can represent a case of somebody you know, or you might actually be experiencing it at this time. So I hope that from today's case study, there will be something for you to learn for yourself or to help somebody to improve their relationship. So we'll be looking at Uzo and Omar that have been together for about 3 years. Omar discovered that Uzo had a short-term affair with a co-worker during a 4-week business trip. She found messages and later confirmed a physical relationship occurred twice. Uzo admitted it, apologized immediately, and said it was a mistake, driven by loneliness and stress. Uzo insists it was a mistake and wants to rebuild trust. However, Omar feels betrayed, humiliated, and unsure whether she can ever trust him again. Uzo insists the affair has nothing on him and it meant nothing to him emotionally. But Omar feels the entire relationship has been called into question. The key issue identified in this case study is a breach of trust due to infidelity. We looked at trust in a previous podcast as a core relationship concept. Trust is a foundational pillar in any meaningful relationship, and infidelity here creates a breach of trust. Infidelity here produces severe damage in their relationship. In some other relationships, it may not be infidelity that causes the breach of trust. It could be deception, it could be emotional abandonment. But whatever it is that causes a breach of trust, it could have damaging effects on that relationship. In our case study, Omar feels emotionally unsafe and constantly second-guessing Uzo's words and actions. Omar is experiencing emotional shock. She's having intrusive thoughts, anger, and grief, while Uzo is filled with guilt, shame, and a strong desire to move on, but doesn't understand why Omar cannot move on with him, and this leads to an emotional fallout. We need to be careful in displaying avoidance versus processing. What do I mean? In this case study, Uzo tends to minimize conflict and wants to fix things quickly. Omar needs to process her emotions, talk about what happened, and understand why that happened. Omar and Uzo's relationship clearly displays unmet needs and relationship dynamics have changed. Uzo admits that he feels disconnected and unimportant in the months ahead of the affair. So before the affair, he was having this feeling, this connection, feeling unimportant, but it was not communicated. It's an unmet need that was not communicated. Omar says that she was focused on advancing her career, but didn't realize it had affected their intimacy that deeply. These things happen so easily in life. We would look at some common unmet emotional needs that could contribute to a breach of trust. First of all, we'll look at the need for emotional connection. Humans are wired for attachment and attunement, which speaks of how we recognize and respond to another person's emotional needs and moods. Uzo may have felt disconnected or emotionally distant from Oma. In their conversations, it became surface level or routine. Uzo may have missed feeling seen or valued. It is possible that an affair partner may have made Uzo feel emotionally important or deeply hurt. A sign of missing, a sign of missing emotion, or a sign of disconnection, or a sign of emotional distance is evident by statements made by Uzo. I didn't feel like we were close anymore. We barely talked about anything real. There is a need for appreciation and affirmation. People want to feel wanted, respected, and acknowledged. Uzo may have felt taken for granted or invisible in the relationship, and the affair partner may have offered positive reinforcement or admiration that he was craving. Sign of the missing need for appreciation and affirmation is reflected in his statements. At work, she complimented me. At home, I felt like nothing. Nothing I did was enough. I felt unseen. I felt invisible, unimportant. There is a need for intimacy and affection, emotionally or physically. Know that intimacy, it can be shown through touch, vulnerability, or closeness. And in our case study above, this couple rarely showed any sign of affection or sexual connection. Uzo may have sought validation through physical touch or flirtation. Oftentimes, in a breach of trust following infidelity or deception, the affair may serve as a substitute for emotional or physical affection that have gone cold. So, in this case study, the sign of missing intimacy and affection is seen in statements such as, we had not been intimate in months. I feel like a roommate rather than a partner. There is a need, there can be, not possibly, there can be a need for novelty and excitement for some people. In long-term relationships, it requires effort to maintain curiosity and excitement. If Uzo felt that his life was becoming predictable or stagnant or even boring, the affair may have felt a need for thrill and feeling alive, or the affair may have provided a temporary escape from routine and emotional dullness. This sign is seen by statements such as, it wasn't about love, it's about feeling something new. There could be the need for autonomy and self-worth. And sometimes a breach of trust through infidelity may reflect a search for identity and not just a relationship failure. Uzo may have struggled with low self-esteem, stress, or pressure and used the affair to feel in control, desirable, or powerful again. And the need for validation outside the relationship could have been a deeper issue for him. And this can be seen from statements such as, I didn't even recognize myself. That attention made me feel that I mattered again. What about the need for conflict avoidance or the need for emotional escape? Although not acceptable practice, some people use infidelity as a coping mechanism when they don't know how to address dissatisfaction or conflict directly. They feel dissatisfied and they don't know how to address it. But like I said, it is not an acceptable practice, but that can happen in reality in some relationships. If Uzo and Oma had unspoken resentments or unresolved conflict and may have escaped emotionally through someone else instead of working through their problems. You can notice comments such as, I didn't know how to talk about what was wrong, and this felt easier. We have looked at some common unmet emotional needs that may contribute to a breach of trust. But I want to say, even if our emotional needs are unmet, infidelity is a choice. It is not an inevitable outcome. So you can also choose not to go that direction because it breaches the trust in your relationship. The unmet needs we have explored here will explain the why behind the vulnerability. But the responsibility for crossing boundaries lies with the person who betrayed. They had a choice to make in that moment, a choice to be faithful or a choice to be an infidel or express infidelity. There is always a choice to make in life. It is best to avoid breaching trust. The Bible tells us in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 10, verse 8, reading from the King James Bible version, "He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh a hedge, a serpent shall bite him." That is the reading of God's word. And from the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 18, we read from the Message Bible version, "Run away from sexual immorality in any form, whether thought or behavior, whether visual or written. Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the one who is sexually immoral sins against his own body." That is the reading of God's word. However, if the breach has happened, then we have to seek ways to rebuild trust. And there are some necessary steps that can be taken to rebuild trust after betrayal. Rebuilding trust after betrayal, especially within an intimate relationship, is a process that requires time, consistency, and emotional courage from both partners. The process is not about quickly moving on. Rather, it's about rebuilding emotional safety, honesty, and emotional connection from the ground up. Because it's not a process of patching up a wall, but rebuilding it. Rebuilding it. Consider what you do to remedy a shaky structure. If you had a shaky structure, what would you do? Will you just patch up the cracked walls? Or will you just put a coat of paint over the surfaces, over the patches? I think you want to check the foundation of the structure and reinforce the foundation before any cosmetic work is done to that structure. Well, that is the approach I will take. And I hope that's the approach you take as well. So we'll consider some steps that we can choose to take to rebuild trust after betrayal, whether it's from infidelity, from deception, or from emotional abandonment. The first step is that there has to be a full and honest acknowledgement of the betrayal. The betrayer has to honestly admit what happened without minimizing, blaming, or justifying their actions, and be very transparent about all relevant details. And during this process, it should not gradually reveal information over time, otherwise referred to as trickle-treating, because this has damaging consequences to trust. Disclose all details. I must emphasize that telling the truth is a fundamental step to rebuilding trust in any relationship. Denial or half-truths only delay healing. And the second step is that while it is very important to allow the hurt partner to grieve by recognizing that in such cases expressing feelings of sadness, anger, confusion, and even obsession are normal parts of the grieving process. I would also remind that if you're staying too long in this grieving state, it will delay your healing. I'll encourage you, if you may, to listen to the podcast on letting go of pain for a better relationship, because in that podcast, we looked at several nuggets that will help this healing process with reference to several Bible passages. Your feelings are valid, but healing is not passive. If you want to rebuild trust within your relationships, then active participation matters tremendously. I would advise the betrayer to be willing to hear the pain, even if it is uncomfortable and has been repeatedly mentioned, and try not to rush forgiveness or demand that your friend, your partner, or your spouse get over it. During this moment, you can reassure your friend, your partner, your spouse that their actions are valid and that you will stay present as they process this. Do not rush the process by making insensitive comments such as, "Have we not talked about this enough?" Do not use guilt, which can be reflected by statements such as, "I already said sorry. What more do you want?" And do not gaslight with statements such as, "You overreacting," or "You should trust me by now." Do not get defensive using comments such as, "What about what you did?" This rebuilding process does not need such defensive competition, as it is very much unhealthy to that relationship. You need to be open and consistently transparent to rebuild a sense of predictability and emotional safety. And you can do this by initiating updates rather than waiting to be asked. If you're going to be unavailable or late, example, why don't you let the other person know? Do not make room for unnecessary suspicion. Be intentional to offer open communication, even if it's repetitive or hard. You can share your schedules, you can share your itineraries, you can share your location or your whereabouts if requested for a time, or even your phone passwords. Nothing wrong with that. And while you're being open and transparent with each other, endeavor to explore the root causes of the breach of trust without justifying the wrong action. Understanding what internal or relational vulnerabilities that led to that betrayal, that deception, or that emotional abandonment, and doing something about it. Find out, was there unexpressed loneliness? Was there a resentment? Was it a case of poor boundaries, or was it a case of self-sabotage? Reflection and exploration during the rebuilding process does not excuse what happened, but both of you understand that whatever may have happened had a root cause, and you don't want that to happen again. That is the process and the reason for this, exploring the root cause. Having open communications will create opportunity where you can renegotiate relationship expectations around honesty, communication, privacy, emotional availability, and even boundaries. Remember that if old rules were broken, then new rules must be made consciously and together. You can rebuild emotional intimacy gradually and commit to long-term repair. Remember, trust is not built in a day. It may take weeks, it may take months, it may take years to fully stabilize. As such, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for relapses of doubt, triggers, and fear, even during good phases. And I would encourage you to listen to the podcast on trust, which was our first relationship core concept. If you are the one who breached the trust, you can reassure your friend, your partner, your spouse that you know that this will take time, but you will be there for the long haul. Small emotional actions such as daily check-ins, honest sharing, expressions of care will help both partners to reconnect better. And be mindful that physical intimacy should return at the pace of the hurt partner, not as a form of obligation. Be determined to resolve to start slow and to rebuild closeness in a way that feels safe for both of you. And then finally, endeavor to make amends with actions not just words. Apologies are a starting point, but they must be backed by behavior change. Do not just say sorry, but reassure your friend, your partner, or your spouse that although your actions that you committed, those actions were not good, but that you are committed now to earn back their trust daily or as frequently as it's possible. And I do hope that today's podcast will ignite a desire to nurture your relationships and to consider areas where you need to make a change or perhaps add more juice, which means to add power, vigor, energy, interest, or excitement. Tune in for more. Until next time, do your best because relationships matter.